Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to the first episode of Our Fathers and Mothers, where I look at where we came from. Science fiction is a wide field, and what is and isn't science fiction is up for debate at many points. It is crossed with fantasy and westerns, it is researched from those who insist on being pure speculative science, in some cases, but the core element seems to be someone asking, what if? What if spores from another world landed on Earth? What if we could reach the stars? What would be the consequences of that? And this decade, this century, and the last are far from the first time that humanity has asked these questions. The questions go all the way back to the beginning of recorded history. But once you slip past too many centuries, it ceases to become science fiction. For the simple fact that what science did exist was in a nascent and feeble form. But the questions were there, and where the stirring of these ancient questions met the first blossoms of the scientific method, science fiction sprouted. These were our fathers and mothers who looked out at the world, in it themselves and up to the stars. Today, we look at Mary Shelley, the creator of Frankenstein and his monster. She is often considered the mother of speculative science fiction, despite the fact that there was actually very little science in her story. The titular character Frankenstein is a medical student to be sure. He is found by an explorer on a scientific expedition. But if you were to replace the term science with magic or alchemy, and to make Frankenstein's a wizard apprentice, it would not notably change the story. Mary Shelley, however, lived in an age when science based on pure reason was ascendant. So Frankenstein was a doctor of medicine, or at least he was going to be. The story is told in an interesting manner. A young adventurer writes a letter to his sister about a story told to him by Frankenstein, who was told the story of a family of peasants by his creations, who we will call Adam. Did you get that? If not, don't worry. This book soundly breaks the don't nest too many flashbacks in one story rule right off the bat, and it only gets worse as the story goes on. But to the story itself, Frankenstein becomes obsessed with life, with the study of human life, what it was, where it came from, and where it was going. And so the story happens. Frankenstein cannot create a life form, but he does find a way to reanimate a corpse, to warp nature as it was into something that he wanted. His creation is handsome and intelligent. You can thank Hollywood for the neck bolts and the shambling ugliness. As far as Mary Shelley was concerned, the only odd thing about Frankenstein's creation was the unsettling sense of wrongness that he left on people and yellow eyes. But something is wrong with him, something like that, as I said, deeply unsettles people. There's something in Frankenstein's creation that turns people away from it, and his Adam seeks his creator out and wreaks vengeance upon him. Most of the story is about Frankenstein having to deal with Adam's vengeance. So here we have the what if of Mary Shelley's story. The question she asks with all the trappings of science. What if those who practice science turned their attention on their fellow man and warped men into monsters, either deliberately or through neglect and negligence, as in Frankenstein's case? This is the question the mother of science fiction asked, and her children are many. The question helps define the genre of science fiction. The monsters, superhumans, or super soldier that futures writers would postulate grew in variety and number to the point that there is really not one science fiction franchise I can point to that does not have this as an element. It became one of the defining features of science fiction. With some, it is the core question. With some, it is only window dressing. It is such a key element of science fiction that the mere presence seems to give any franchise a flavor of science fiction. So, let's look at some of Mary Shelley's children. For franchises with this as their core element, you can look at Blade Runner as the most obvious. The story might have focused on Harrison Ford, but the question at its core was, what happens sociologically if men use science to create humans for their own uses? Here we have the beautiful monsters created not out of hubris and curiosity, but for practical uses. Another classic is the Universal Soldier franchise, where you have monsters created from dead men who begin to question their creators and try to reclaim their humanity. An even older classic, The Bicentennial Man, lays aside the monster part and focuses instead on the creative life questioning, finding a place in the world. This is in stories like this, the creation will try to gain or regain its humanity to varying degrees of success. There are franchises that simply have this dynamic as a constant and large element. Star Trek has their created beings, starting with Khan in the original series and moving on to Data and the other synths in later series. Voyager even bring back humans from the dead with science in a very Frankenstein-esque manner. Star Wars had the clones and entire arcs devoted to them, and while these stories were light on the monster part, they were heavy on the clones finding their place in the world and dealing with the fact that they had been created out of the hubris of the Jedi. The Expanse on Amazon goes straight for the warping humanity into mindless monsters trope with the altered children, and then goes for the extreme Frankenstein angle with the scientists warping themselves into monsters of pure mind, where the children were pure rage, the scientists are pure thought, pure reason, with one Frankenstein crafting more such hubris-filled, life-obsessed scientists in his own image. Then there are countless franchises who just weave this thread into the story. The soft academic casts are protected by super soldiers. Synths clean the toilets for the real humans. Putty copies of our minds and bodies wade into toxic waste to do the jobs too dangerous for us. A solitary android is left on an empty Earth to aid the visiting aliens in lieu of the vanished humanity. In each case, something living and human is crafted from something dead. This wasn't entirely new, of course. Golems of one sort or another have existed in legends for as long as the records are kept. Tolkien's orcs are something like this trope, but The Witcher is an especially obvious example of this trope, with made monsters abounding in a fantasy setting. But science fiction subtly changes the story. It is no longer about the monsters that were made, but who made them, how, and why. We are the subjects of the story, not Frankenstein's Adam. These, then, are the children of Mary Shelley. These are the literary genes that she granted to the bloodline of science fiction. Some are tinted with horror, some with pathos. To answer the question, what happens when man turns its mind upon man? So, what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Where have you seen Mary Shelley's children? Which is your personal favorite? Do you prefer the tragic monsters who didn't ask to be born, or the pathos of the good men who must fight for their place in humanity? Leave a like below and a comment telling me about your favorite Shelleyite child. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.